As you can see, it's Sunday, April 13th, 2025, and about 2 days, a lot of people are going to mistakenly complete the 1040 form and make themselves liable for a tax that they otherwise would not be. In that vein, we are going to cover some red flags about the excise tax. What's the excise tax? Well, it's mistakenly called the income tax. An excise tax is a tax on sort of exercises or activities that are usually voluntary, such as drilling on government land or working for the government. If you do those things, and you benefit from the government in some way directly, then you have to pay a tax on that. You have to what's called make a return. You have to give them a cut of the gains. Now, if you were to graze cattle on the land and make some money, you'd be like, yeah, sure, I could give a piece of the action to the federal government. It's a little bit harder to imagine why they did it to federal workers, but it started, I think, under Lincoln. If you work for the federal government, you have to make a return. You have to file a form because you're an employee. Usually, that's what the tax actually applies to, but through deception, they have made it so everyone thinks that their private sector pay is also liable to it, is also taxable. And the reason I like red flags is because there's sort of another way of getting through or learning something or getting through to the mind. It's like, well, why would it be that way? So this little point right here is just like my recommendation is most people, if somebody issued a W-2 and called your private sector pay, referred to it as wages, that's likely wrong. In most cases, it's pay, but it's not wages, and we'll come to see why. But if someone makes a false claim against you, such as if you stole a bicycle, you need to rebut that. And so, really, most people, if they've been issued an erroneous W-2, they have to rebut it. They have to send a letter saying, basically, I was paid money, but it's not wages, and here's why. And you have to explain why. You can't just make a claim. You have to substantiate it. Let's press on. And so, first red flag, okay, is that they define the word employee. I mean, just defining common words is a red flag. Like, why would you need to define employee? Well, because they can't tax private sector employees, so they've redefined the commonplace word to mean, you guessed it, somebody who works for the federal government or a state government. So that's what an employee is. And so when you hear that employee pay is taxable, you think it's yours when it's not. It's an employee means someone who works for the federal government. And also another way to think about all this stuff, like the U.S. Code, it's almost like an employee resource guide. For people who work somewhere. If you got hired at a company, there'd be sort of an employee manual or something. It's like, this is how we do things here. The U.S. Code is very much like that. They're talking to their own workers, and in some cases, people in the territories who are not, don't have unalienable rights. So like if you get that higher level point straight, it's like, what is the U.S. Code? It's sort of an employee manual for federal workers. Like many cases it doesn't apply to the average people of the 50 states. So that's a red flag. They define employee. What is employee in the code? Someone who works for the federal government. What are wages? Wages are money paid to employees. So if you're not an employee, you can't get wages. Like, you don't get wages. I don't care how much money you made. Like, yeah, you were paid $1,000. That is not a wage. Why? Because you're not an employee. Next red flag is that similarly, they define the phrase trade or business. Like, that's a red flag. Here you can see what it is. The term trade or business, let me just do that, includes the performance of the functions of a public office. What does that mean in this, gibberish? It means somebody who works for the government. And what includes is restrictive. So if it's like a fence. Otherwise, it would say includes but not limited to. So when something says includes, it's like just this or anything very similar to this. So someone who works at a bicycle store is not in any way performing the functions of a public office. And what does this mean? It means someone who works for the government. Like, you have an office, you have a title or an office, or you're an officer in a certain way. And a little side point, they refer to citizens as officers, as having really they occupy an office of the federal government. But citizen means an employee, not what you have been taught citizen. Anyway, it's a red flag. They define this phrase. So they ask, they'll call a bike store, where's your tax return? It's like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, do you have a trade or business? Like, yeah, I guess so. All right, well, then you're taxable. And the answer is no, I don't have a trade or business because this is a bike store. And have you read the definition, my friend? And that'll end the IRS call real quick. So it's a red flag. They define it, and then it's a red flag that they would even think to call trade or they would even think to define this as a trade or business. But they are trying to deceive people. There is evil in this world. There are mean people. There's Bernie Madoff. There's Enron. There's a lot of theft that goes on. Okay, and the people who work for the federal government, they're flesh and blood as well. And there's evil people there too. So not all of them, but there's some pretty senior people who have sort of steered things in the wrong direction. I don't know about a red flag, but it's important to know this, that even using the internal forms of the government is an employee action. And so, like, if you saw someone completing a Walmart form, it wouldn't be crazy to assume they work for Walmart. So if you use the internal forms of the federal government that are meant for federal employees, the courts will, it's not a stretch to say that people will assume you work for the federal government. And on top of that, by using their forms, you're what? Performing the functions of a public office, because who else uses these forms? People who work for the government. So just by doing that, you're sort of like volunteering yourself as a worker in that act. So don't touch their forms, okay? They are not appropriate for you. If you want to zero out the W-2, which in most cases is necessary because it's false, just write a letter, and I have, links on my website to sample letters. But I highly recommend you really read and comprehend the letter. You don't want to say things you don't believe. I don't use their forms to zero out the W-2. Like, I just write a letter. Like, their forms have nothing to do with me. And more to this is like, yeah, so, like the W-4, like just because like a company, like if a company my company asked me to fill out the forms of like the Hilton Hotel, it'd be like, well, why are you giving me the form of the Hilton Hotel employees? It's like, well, because it's required. It's like, all right, whatever, now complete the form. It doesn't make me an employee of the Hilton Hotel chain. Like the whole thing's absurd. So similarly, like if my company gives me some federal internal government form to fill out, it's like, well, why are you giving this to me? Like, this isn't the federal government. And it's like, well, whatever, got to get paid. But that doesn't like magically turn me into a federal employee and therefore make me liable for the excise tax. This is a red flag, right? Like with property taxes, they just send you a bill, right? Like they just say, here, pay it. But with the income tax, the excise tax, mistakenly called the income tax, they ask people to calculate it. And the reason why is because they want people to mischaracterize their private sector pay as wages or compensation for services in the United States. Most people are not paid either, but that's why they say fill out this form. They want you to hang yourself. So don't touch their forms. And anyway, that's why they do it. That's the red flag. Next, why do they say the word file? That seems a little weird, right? Like with property taxes, they just say pay it. But with the excise tax, mistakenly called the income tax, they say file your 1040 form. And employees do filing, right? And as I said, that the federal income tax does apply to federal workers. Like they have to make a return of a portion, so they tell their employees to file. So what does that mean? They're not talking to us. So stop like thinking they're talking to you. I mean, do you read the internal memos of Walmart and follow what they do? Like don't. So don't. So it's a red flag. They would say file. Like they're talking to their employees is the point. I don't know if this is a red flag, but it's an important point. It's that the 16th Amendment did not lead all workers to pay the tax. Like in 1913, they passed the 16th Amendment, and more people paid the tax consequently, but not everyone, not all workers. What the 16th Amendment did was sort of correct. There was a court case in 1910, 3 years earlier, that ruled that that you couldn't tax certain federal like dividends on from federal corporations or just certain things related to the federal government. And everyone had always said, like, well, no, if you profit from the federal government as an employee or any of their assets, you need to make a return, pay a tax or make a return of a portion of the gains. After the case in 1910, they passed the 16th Amendment, just sort of put things back where they were, but it didn't expand it. It didn't say, oh, now the federal government can directly tax people in the states. It can't. The federal government can directly tax the states, and the states can directly tax their people, but the federal government can't jump over the states and tax the people. It can't. And the 16th Amendment did not change that. I mean, there's just countless Supreme Court decisions showing that it's erroneous to think the 16th Amendment created some new tax. It just sort of said all federal sources, okay? That means something owned by the government, or, you work for them, you're using their land, something, then it's taxable. If you go to this chart, this famous chart, you could see here that after the 16th Amendment, proceeds from the excise tax rose because it doesn't show you before 1910, but I imagine it was very high before that, because basically in 1910 there's the court case which struck it down. So then the 16th Amendment was passed to bring back what was already being done. But you could see here that this 100% line, like all worker pay was not subject to not all workers were paying the income tax. And I'd say most of this was not workers. It was people like, gaining gains from the, use of federal property or dividends, as I said. What happened in World War II is that people started paying what's called the victory tax voluntarily. And just through the chaos and confusion of World War II and then they started deluging and flooding post offices with the 1040 form, they made people think that suddenly they did need to pay it. And there was also the 1939 Public Salary Tax Act, which sort of changed the definitions of things. So I've read the Public Tax Act a couple of times, but I haven't really grasped it. But I imagine what they just sort of could now, as a consequence of that act, sort of forcefully say all employees and must pay the tax, when really they were, as previously stated in this call, in this video, they're only saying federal employees. They're saying employees, but what does it mean? What does employee mean when the federal government says it? It means just people who work for the government or state governments. So this is when things kicked in. So it wasn't the 16th Amendment. It was World War II, and then just the deception just kicked in on overdrive. Here's a red flag. So the W-2 form has 3 types of wages, whereas you would expect there just be one line, like what were you paid? And so let's take a look at that. So here you go. So you could see here there's this type of wages, there's Social Security wages and Medicare wages. The reason is because this type of wages has a special definition, and these two have a different definition, but they all sort of are limited to kind of what I've been saying, is that it's just wages paid to federal workers. And also this compensation, which you cannot ignore if you're going to rebut the W-2. You have to say, this pay, I was paid money, but it wasn't compensation for services in the United States. Because what does that mean? In the United States, what's the United States? The federal government. So just a red flag that they would separate this out. I think most people would expect there just be one line, like how much were you paid and what were the taxes that were withheld. But it's not that way. It's all through, as I said, word definition, deception, and it's just more elaborate in this case. This is a red flag, sort of like the IRS will say certain things, like there's certain claims about the tax are frivolous. They don't say false, and I feel like that's a red flag. They'll say frivolous. How you don't often see the word frivolous. What they're saying is, what is something frivolous? It's sort of, it could be something that's true in a certain context, but not true in another. So let's say you go out to dinner, and then you say, hey, I'm not going to pay because the sky is blue. That's frivolous, because the sky is blue. That's true, but it doesn't have any application to whether you're going to pay this dinner bill or not. And so that's what happens sort of when you get into sort of tax arguments, is that someone will say, the federal government cannot tax people worker pay directly. And that is true, but that's not what's happening here, is that they are never claiming to try and do that. They are getting people to mischaracterize their own pay as pay to federal workers. So they're not trying to tax everyone. They are only taxing sort of federal workers. People hang themselves. They mischaracterize their pay as wages. The other thing about nationals versus citizens is that I guess the red flag is that often you'll read news stories that talk about Mexican nationals or Chinese nationals. But when it comes to the tax code, they'll just talk about citizens. And so I feel like that's a red flag. Why would they be different? Well, the thing is, citizen in the context of the code can mean different things. And so there's a famous video by Obama, which I'll link to below, where it's or maybe I could play it right now. Let's see if it'll work. Here we go.
Because for all our outward differences, we, in fact, all share the same proud title, the most important office in a democracy, citizen.
All right, so what he's saying is citizen is an office. It's a title. And he's basically talking to federal workers, and all federal workers are called citizens. So, in the context of the U.S. Code, most people are not citizens. We're sort of nationals or natives of our own one of the 50 states, but stay away from the word citizen. It's not a big deal to say you're not a U.S. citizen or to say like I'm not a citizen of the United States. In fact, I have an article where it's like points out in the code that an air carrier is called a citizen of the United States. Like a citizen's like a ship or a corporation. I have no problem saying I'm not a U.S. citizen. I'm not. I'm a native of one of the 50 states. That's my, the states are nation states, by the way, the 50 states. This is a red flag. Well, they define the term United States. That might be a red flag right there. But they also say when used in a geographical sense. What that means is that most of the time, United States is not used in a geographical sense. So a lot of people get focused on, oh, it only includes the states and the DC. I mean, that's true. Like this is basically saying United States is just DC and the territories. This is, and you can get into another time. But the real heart of the matter, though, is this other thing that often initially I overlooked, but this man David Williams pointed out, is that United States, when used in any federal law, is nearly always a thing. It's not a place. So when they say, "Do you work in the United States?" they're asking, "Do you work like?" In the halls of the United, do you work in the buildings of the United States? Do you work for, they're saying, do you work for the United States? That's what it means, because they're not saying it as geographically. Why is it called a tax return? Like, why is it called a return? Like, if I borrow a lawnmower from the neighbor to my left, I'm not going to return it to the neighbor to my right, right? Like, you return it back to the neighbor to your left. And so the reason it's called a return is because people who benefit from the federal government have to return a portion. Like, the government is giving you something. It's either giving you pay or it's giving you access to land to cut timber or drill for oil, and you need to return a portion of the proceeds, right? They get a piece of the action. It's a little harder to, sort of see why, but basically Lincoln, like the government was starved for money, so he sort of asked for soldiers to return a portion of their pay. So that's where it came up. So just the fact that it's called a return, you have to say like I got paid by a bike store downtown. Why am I returning a portion to the federal government? Right? It doesn't make sense, because that's not, you shouldn't be doing that. You don't owe a return to anyone. If you work for the federal government or you gain from the federal government, then you must make a return. And that's actually the true phrase that's going on. Next, last one. Corporate income tax, most of the forms actually reveal the truth. They say it's an excise tax. That should be a red flag. Like if you own a business and you're like, wait, why does it say excise tax? It is an excise tax, and excise taxes are voluntary. Like you don't have to do them, don't have to do things that way. And with businesses, they don't have to incorporate. Like that's pretty much a mistake to do that, because you sort of potentially make yourself liable. You incorporate your business into something else that you might, if you do own a business, you might sort of notice now, like why is it income? It actually is an excise tax. In all applications, it is an excise tax. So why is it? It's mischaracterized as an income tax. Why? Because they want to give the impression that all earnings are taxable, and they're not. An excise tax is a tax on certain activities. And how much tax do you have to pay? Well, it's how much did you gain from that activity. So if you drill on federal land and you sell that oil and you profit from it, like whatever your profit is, the government gets a cut of it. I have an extensive page with many, many links and more details about the excise tax, otherwise called the income tax, and how to rebut erroneous W-2s. There's also this great interview with David Williams. It has helped me immensely, and he really knows the code. And then there's a short video, which I highly recommend, just sort of, makes many key points. It's only like 8 minutes. But one of the points he makes, and I'll leave you with this, is, he says if you make jet airplanes and you sell them to United Airlines, that is not a taxable event. If you sell planes to the U.S. Army, that is a taxable event. The federal government wants you to think that selling airplanes to anyone is taxable, and it's not. So I hope these red flags have helped you see the excise tax, otherwise called an income tax, in a different light. As I said, actually, let me go to the end here. It is very important to rebut erroneous W-2s or 1099s. I mean, if someone claimed you stole a bicycle, you need to walk down to the sheriff and complete a statement and autograph it under penalty of perjury, saying, no, I didn't steal a bike. Otherwise, sort of someone else's claims will stand. They'll take you to court, and at the very least, you want to get your letter into the court record, and you do that by putting your claim on paper and signing it under penalty of perjury. And I'd like to point out that you would sign it according to 28 USC 1746, and that would be, you would sign it without United States, but under the laws of the United States of America. Why is it without? Because basically, United States, when it's used geographically, means DC and the territories. When it's not used geographically, it just means the federal government. So in both those cases, that's not most of us. I've read that in order for something to be accepted as the court, it has to be done under penalty of perjury, and so that's what you'd be doing here: is signing, is autographing that way. Humans autograph, machines or whatever companies just have signs, right? Like a stop sign or a company logo or something, or a stamp. Very important to rebut the W-2s. I might have a link to that here. So correct the W-2, right? So I have an older letter, not too old, that I once sent out, but it's important to know what this is. Like, I wouldn't just send this off, be like, oh, I'm in the clear. Like, if you can't, defend this or really comprehend it, just wait until you do comprehend it. Wait until it sinks in, it becomes evident, and then making this claim is not a perjury. Is not perjury. Like, you could, if someone thinks the sky is green and they say it, that's not perjury, because they do in their heart think the sky is green. And maybe they're colorblind or something, right? So they're not lying. You want to make statements that you believe, and everything I've said here I believe, and so I wouldn't be committing perjury. But it is important to send this note in if a company has erroneously called by private sector pay wages. Same thing with 1099s. I hope these things make you think in a different way about the scam. I mean, it's not a scam, because some people do actually owe the income tax, the excise tax, but most people don't.